Archaeology nationally, and from Bozeman, Montana, and most of the national office is here today to present results of our research on learning outcomes and some other related topics. And because it's mostly project archaeology papers, we're not going to tell you a lot about project archaeology. So we have left some brochures on some seats, so take a look at that if you want more information about the program. And better yet, come down to booth number 516 in the exhibit hall, and we will be happy to talk to you at length about project archaeology and on into the evening, so forth. So we will get started right away. Our first paper is by Alegria and myself, it's mostly by Crystal, Descendant Communities and Curriculum Development, working towards a culturally relevant development process.
Thank you, Jeanne. Thanks everyone for being here today as well. It's exciting to have a research symposium with so many project archaeology papers being represented. On September 22nd of 2009, the Absarki Agency Collaborative Archaeology Education Project began. This project was an extension of day-long education experiences for elementary students that the Montana Department of Transportation, MDT, and Project Archaeology have been doing since 2006. While the day-long projects were good, we wanted to build a more collaborative, longer-lasting, and sustainable project. The Crow Indian Agency, or the Absarki Agency, as we will refer to it in this paper, was the project that gave us the opportunity to do this. The setting for this project was the Crow Indian Agency. Let's see if I can figure out how to move that. Okay. There we go. Right. The setting for this project was the Crow Indian Agency, built by the U.S. government in 1875 as a distribution point for annuity goods to the Crow tribe. The agency operated from 1875 to 1884. Proposed reconstruction of Montana Highway 78, which passes through the old agency, prompted the Montana Department of Transportation to undertake archaeological evaluation at the site in 2006 and again in 2011 in preparation for road construction. Archaeology at the site produced many artifacts that can tell us, there we go. Archaeology at the site produced many artifacts that can tell us many things about the daily life of the Crow people and the non-native employees who lived at the agency. Due to the significance of this site, MDT and Project Archaeology decided to work together to develop a larger collaborative education project that included the descendant community, using this site as the connecting point. When we were designing this project, this book was hot off the press. I'm sure a few of you in this room have read it. It's a great, wonderful book. If you haven't read it, please get it and read it. The introduction, the collaborative continuum, was instrumental in the formation of this project. We started by using a collaborative inquiry model, but as we moved through the project, we added elements of the community-based participatory research model. To define these two models, collaborative inquiry is a process consisting of repeated episodes of reflection and action through which a group of peers strives to answer a question of importance to them. CBPR is a partnership approach to research that equitably involves community members, organizational representatives, and researchers in all aspects of the process, in which all partners contribute expertise and share decision-making and ownership. In 2009, going back to 8 years ago, in 2009, we created our core collaborative team, which consisted of Crow tribal members, archaeologists, educators, and university students. Over the course of this project, this team has worked together to develop a curriculum, host a volunteer excavation day at the site, or actually a few weekends at the site. We completed one teacher workshop along with many individual events over the last 8 years at the site. So as we were coming to the end of this project, we were interested in evaluating our effectiveness in achieving a collaborative model for descendant communities, educators, students, and archaeologists to work together. So we gathered research data from 7 members of this core collaborative team and used it as a small case study. The interview questions were as follows and were modified from Nichole et al. That was a chapter in the collaboration in archaeological practice. So here were our research interview questions for that core collaborative team of 7 people. The first one, what was your level of engagement with the development of this project? Was there a sense of personal satisfaction by engaging in this project? Do you think the outcomes of this project were valuable to the community? Did the project facilitate interactions with the community? Did the project and will the curriculum benefit participants and the larger community? And did this project create new long-term relationships? So during this case study, I interviewed 2 of the team members on the telephone, transcribed their interviews, and then edited those interviews and sent them back to them for them to check them. So I did that with 2 of the interviews. The rest, the remaining 5 members of the team provided written responses to the interview questions. So Dr. Jeanne coded the responses on a scale of 1 to 3, with 1 representing the least strong or positive response to the question, while 3 represented the strongest or most positive response possible. There were no responses of 0 because all of the participants provided a viable answer to each question. So we examined the relationship between the level of involvement and the level of satisfaction. So satisfaction on the left, involvement on the bottom. And you can see that we coded this with the 7 people. So 1 person answered a 2 on level of satisfaction. 1 person answered a 1 on level of involvement. So that's the first from the left over there. 1 person answered 2 on satisfaction, 2 on involvement. 2 people answered 3 on satisfaction and 2 on involvement. And 3 people answered 3 on level of satisfaction and 3 on level of involvement. In other words, the more involved the person was in the project, the more he or she reported high satisfaction with participation in the project. Not surprisingly, the 3 strongest correlations between involvement and personal satisfaction were found with the 3 members who were instrumental in the entire project from start to finish. Shane Doyle, our co-tribal member, Steve Auburn, the archaeologist, and myself. While others experienced considerable personal satisfaction, they were not instrumental to the project and came to the collaborative process later. Some examples of responses that illustrate the significance of the project to participants include, starting over there on the left with Victoria. She was one of the university students who helped us with this project. She says, I was only 21 years old on this project and really discovered the type of archaeologist I wanted to be. And Shane Doyle in the middle says, I gained a great sense of personal satisfaction from engaging in the collaboration because it brought to life an important, often neglected, and unknown part of our shared history. And then Steve Auberg says, it was personally satisfying for me as an archaeologist, giving me a feeling that my contribution reached far beyond the professional community. So those were responses we pulled from questions 1 and 2. And now we're going to look at questions 3 through 6. So question 3, if you remember back, focused on outcomes. Question 4 focused on interactions. Question 5 on benefits. And question 6 on relationships. So you can see that the 7 people gave us a 3 score on the outcomes, the interactions and the benefits, and then a little bit lower on the relationships, and we'll talk about that. So all of the, talking about the outcomes, all of the team members agree that outcomes of the project were valuable to the local community, to the Crow tribe, and to the nation by exposing this previously unknown chapter of our shared history. So some sample responses include, yes, this history is not in our textbooks. It's pertinent to our sense of place, from Robin Lovick, one of our teachers. Jeanne Moe says, I'm so excited to see the agency take its place in national history to show how cultures came together in the American West. And that's Jeanne in the middle with her hat over her eyes. And then Steve Auberg says, collaboration appeared to renew a tribal voice for expressing their feelings and articulating their perspective on the history of the agency period. So question 4 about interactions. Similarly, all the team members agreed that the project facilitated interactions at the local, state, and national levels. Special activities in Columbus and Absaroka, Montana, and at the agency site involved both members of the local community, members of the Crow tribes, archaeologists, and project archaeology educators. During the excavations, 16 volunteers participated in archaeological instruction and assisted the crew at the site. Bus tours and some local residents received tours of the site also while under excavation. A summer school group from northern Wyoming visited the site after learning about archaeology in the classroom. So we have some samples from question 4, some sample of the responses. Shane Doyle says, it required that people visit face-to-face, an important part of creating a respectful setting for listening and honest communication. Steve Auberg, the archaeologist, says, I have had more requests to present on the archaeology and history of this agency than any other site I have worked on in over 40 years of archaeology. And Steve Platt, the Montana Department of Transportation archaeologist, said, the project was a catalyst for getting the Crow people more interested in that part of Montana where they no longer have a reservation. So question 5, which was about benefits. The interviewees agreed that the benefits of the collaborative project were significant and far-reaching. It touched the archaeological profession, the Crow tribe and other tribes in the region, the local community, and will reach the nation through a curriculum that fills a major gap in the history of the American West. The coming together of different cultures with both good and bad consequences. So we have some responses from this question. Question 5. Victoria, our university student, again says, this project can be a great example of how to do solid collaborative work in the CRM world. And then Steve Auberg, the archaeologist, says, the history of the agency illustrates so well the course of events that forever affected the lives of Native Americans, while at the same time addressing the misunderstandings that continue to color relationships. And then Shane Doyle says, creating a culture of learning and respecting what history has to teach us. This is one of the greatest things that the project can put the community on a path towards. So question 6, our last question. Some of the relationships, and this is about relationships, some of the relationships established through this project have endured to the present day. For example, Robin Lovick, our teacher, one of our teachers, met Jennifer Flatlip, a Crow tribal educator, through the project and has invited her to speak in Livingston, Montana every year for the past 8 years. As Shane Doyle put it so well, quote, the project was a starting point for a multitude of friendships and collaborative partners that continue to exist today, end quote. 2 members of the core collaborative team, Victoria and Steve Platt, Victoria Bachmian and Steve Platt, were not as successful at maintaining and expanding relationships after the excavation project closed. So think back to the graph with that last question. This was largely due to circumstances. Steve Platt's role as a general project coordinator ceased after the excavation closed, and Victoria continued her relationship with the Crow tribe and did move on to a graduate degree involving other important Crow sites, but as a graduate student, she did move out of Montana. Additionally, new relationships have been forged through the distribution of the curriculum at the Museum of the Beartooths in Columbus, Montana in July 2016. Educators from the Crow, Northern Cheyenne, and Blackfeet tribes attended the workshop, helped us assess the value of the curriculum, and helped us brainstorm a lesson on the archaeological stewardship and protection of the site of the Absaroka Agency. The workshop experience and the help of 7 educators who attended will assist Project Archaeology with completing the curriculum. So, what did we learn from all of this? What did we learn from our collaborative project? And how will we use this information to inform upcoming projects? We learned that the data analysis showed that the more involved the person was in the project, the more he or she reported high satisfaction. In the future, we will encourage higher engagement in the project if possible. We had high levels of participation from educators directly involved with the project. Also archaeologists and the Descendant community members, but lower participation from the on-the-ground teachers. The focus for the future will be to engage teachers more directly in the project and have more contact with the teachers to increase their level of participation in the whole project, not just the piloting and the assessment. We did have a lot of engagement from the Descendant community members throughout the project, but often they were one-time engagements instead of project-long engagement. For example, we had Descendant community members attend the volunteer excavation days, but no other part of the project, while other Descendant community members attended the educator workshop, but no other aspect of the project. So in the future, we will increase the level of Descendant community engagement, making the engagement more long-term and lasting through the entire project if possible. We also learned we need to ask for more money for these projects. We have to ask for more money for all our projects, but these in particular, because these collaborative projects are really intense but so important. So in the future we will do that. We will propose, in the future we will have a more realistic cost assessment for collaborative projects and submit proposals accordingly. And also in the future, we would like to broaden the sample size. We had a fairly small sample size this time. So over the past 8 years, we have seen the power of collaboration. For us, the most important aspect of this collaborative projects are the new friendships and partnerships and relationships that have formed, and the old friendships and partnerships that have been renewed. It's critical as we move forward to involve community members, including the Descendant community, educators, students, and possibly others in the research process, providing information to the public and the community that is relevant to them and solves their problems. As Sonia Adelaide says, quote, "At this juncture of the discipline, archaeology sustainability is linked to collaboration. Research endeavors must be relevant to, accessible by, and done for the benefit of the local communities," unquote. Thank you very much.
Next up, putting Project Archaeology teacher workshops to the test. Written by Courtney Agenten, presented by Jeanne and Tony Hartshorn as a co-author.
Okay. All right. So we've been doing, I think it's a good thing I don't need to read this because you can't. We've been doing Project Archaeology workshops for a long time, and we've always evaluated them, but it's been more of the yuck yay kind of thing. Oh yeah, I really liked it, or no, I didn't like it so much, and I would change this. But now we want to get into a much more sophisticated way of evaluating how well our Project Archaeology workshops are doing. So we just got to start on that this summer. Great. Okay. So our research questions are, what do teachers need? What do teachers need to teach about archaeology effectively in the classroom? So when they're done, what do they have to go back to their classroom and do what they need to do? And then secondly, how can we measure this, their effectiveness for content knowledge, and then also inquiry-based learning? All right, so using a model from professional development, there's 5 aspects of professional development that are critical elements for being successful. First of all, content focus. So that's how to use the materials and assess the content learning. And then second is active learning. Are the teachers actively engaged as their students would be? And just talking to the teachers is not going to do it. They need to be actively involved. Third, coherence. the extent to which teacher learning is consistent with their knowledge and beliefs, and also aligns with their standards that they have to teach. Fourth, duration. Time is important in learning, and ideally, professional development should be spread out over time, like say 2 or 3 hours a week over a period of weeks, and at least 20 hours of contact time to make any real difference with this. And then lastly, collective participation. Learners are part of a professional community. On the other side, I gave us a self-assessment here for what Project Archaeology does. So I think the content focus, I think we're at a 5, with 5 being good. 1 being not so good, so 5 being good. We were able to give them a lot of content. A lot of workshops that teachers go to, it's all about pedagogy, how to teach, but no real content. We do both, and I think we do both pretty well. The active learning gave us a 5 on that because we asked the teachers to put on their 4th grade hats and just be students while they're doing the learning so that they are actively involved and we're not just talking to them. Coherence, we developed all of our materials with their knowledge, beliefs, and their standards in mind, so we think we're doing pretty well on that. Duration, not as easy because we can't spread it over, usually can't spread it over a period of time, and we have to do it in isolated workshops and chunks of time, which isn't as good, but we don't have much choice in that usually. So I give us a 4 on that. And then collective participation, learners are part of a professional community, and we would like to do workshops within whole school districts and train whole school districts. We're not to that point right now. We have more of a model of y'all come, so we just get everybody, so they are not really a community, not really a professional community. So we don't do as well as that. Hope to do better in the future. Okay. Okay, so looking at this on a continuum, so I hope you can hear. So we go from these 5 areas to here, and so increase teacher knowledge and skills, change their attitudes and beliefs, and from there they change instruction, and we see that with Project Archaeology teachers, and we have a lot of teachers who say, this changed the way I teach, and in fact now my classroom is completely inquiry-based. We do in everything. And then that would go to improve student learning. So that would be the continuum. Keep this in mind, and I'll come back to it at the end when we wrap up. So, all right. So the methods. We had a class of 10 teachers this past summer, and we got some funding for it. And they did instruction with Project Archaeology investigating a Roman villa. And I'll explain that here in just a little bit. And then we also were tasked with doing instruction in geoarchaeology and the geology of the Yellowstone Valley. So they're studying Roman history, but then also something local. And that was, let's see if I can have a slide for that. Yes, so here's the Roman villa, leisure and luxury in the age of Nero. And that's the village of Aplantis near Pompeii, which was buried in 79 AD. So you're probably wondering what a bunch of folks in Montana are doing with Roman history. Well, it's kind of an odd situation because the art historian does Roman frescoes, and she studied this, so she brought the exhibit to Bozeman, Montana. So we had the opportunity then to create a cross-curricular curriculum with it, and we got a little bit of funding for it. So we took off in this area, and it's been quite a learning experience for us. All right, so it's buried by Mount Vesuvius, just like Pompeii, as everybody knows about. And so here's the list of the lessons, and you can see that we did do a couple of pieces on geology and geoarchaeology. So knowing the land, what that land is like, and how the people lived on it. And then Vesuvius erupts, which is really fun because you take a can or a trash can and blow it up, and of course everybody thinks that's really great. Okay, so So our task of relating Rome and the Yellowstone Valley was a tough one. So that was a hard thing for us to do, but that's what we had the money for, so that's what we had to do. And of course, the main thing is that we have Yellowstone, which is a volcano. It's a very different kind of volcano than Vesuvius was. It's a caldera instead of a pyroclastic flow, but so we had to work with that. So that made things a little difficult, which we'll come back to later. So the development of appropriateness, I won't go over all of this, but the teachers, when asked, thought that the curriculum that we gave them was very developmentally appropriate for their students. They liked the readability, goals, activities, all of these sorts of things. So we scored really high in all of those with the teachers who took the class. Okay, and then we did a pre-survey and a post-survey of content knowledge. So we had quite a few teachers, so the blue is the pre. So we, get this before we're done? Okay, so some of the teachers had quite a bit of content knowledge already in this, for example, this one gained a little bit at the end. Some of them had very little content knowledge and learned a lot. So it's really kind of all over the place with that, and it really depends on probably a real personal part of it. This person we didn't get a research survey from, so that's why that's missing there. And then inquiry-based learning is another piece that we looked at. And we had the sample that we had was a group of classroom teachers, about 4 of them, a couple of librarians, and then other educators like paraprofessionals. So you can see that looking at orientation, the classroom teachers were high on all of these things, on routine use and motivation to do it. The other educators had a little more trouble with it, so they weren't as motivated for it. And then at the end, the classroom teachers, the other educators did go up towards the end, so they were really oriented towards it. The knowledge-dependent one is the belief that you have to have a lot of knowledge before you can teach inquiry, so that they felt that they had to be experts before they could do that. So that's why that's a little bit lower. I hope that makes sense, and maybe we can have a minute to come back to it. Okay. All right, so the geoarchaeology, that was a little hard, but it was also really fun too. So that was our goal, was to tie it to the Yellowstone ecosystem. And we did that through an introduction in the classroom to soil science and geoarchaeology, and then some field work at an archaeological site in the Yellowstone Valley. So we gave them a good chance to get really dirty with looking at the stratigraphy. And then we took those soil samples back to the lab and analyzed them. And our results for geoarchaeology look a little different. You can see up here the field trip and the, okay, so up here, they thought that only 3 thought it was highly effective, 6 thought it was sort of effective, and the same with the soil sample. Thinking like an archaeologist, they were a little bit split on that too. And then when you come to the introduction to geoarchaeology, the teachers did have some problems with that, so they weren't rating as highly. Now here, looking at this, so pre-workshop, the teachers seem to have a lot of knowledge of archaeology and some knowledge of STEM. We had a little bit of growth in the STEM learning here, and a little growth in the content knowledge on the archaeology and science part of it. All right, so we ran into some science issues. And here's some of the quotes that I think illustrate it really well. One of the teachers said, "The science elements were a little difficult for me, but it wasn't for lack of trying on the part of the instructors." And said, "I just tend to gloss over whenever there's an equation." So, pretty typical response. And then much of the geoarchaeology was over my head, but I really enjoyed learning about it too. So kind of lost on it, but really thought it was interesting and fun. The field trip was incredible. It is always nice to have a hands-on application. They did just love the field trip. All right, so in conclusion on this, so they were, at the end of it, so you know, I had the picture of being outside next to the stratigraphy. Well, here we are in the triclinium of Atlantis with a group photo. So, you know, what a difference between the two. So we're really asking them to look at two very different things. So, but they were excited to teach archaeology and they felt competent to do so. They were definitely much more interested in Roman history than they were in local archaeology and history. But it was a highly skewed sample. We had teachers who were coming because it was investigating a Roman villa. So we had a Latin teacher, a very competent Latin teacher. We had an art teacher, and we had several history teachers. We did not have any science teachers in this whatsoever. And they were, while they were kind of interested in it, but they definitely didn't feel competent to move forward with science. They felt really, really comfortable with the history part of it, but not with the science part of it. And one question that we had, there seemed to be a real resistance to interdisciplinary teaching, which will lead into a paper my own paper that I'm going to give here in just a minute, that when they went away, they were going to teach about archaeology. They got that, but they were not interested in the science parts of it, even though archaeology is science too. So they didn't seem to quite make that connection with it. But you know, we think that the professional development was effective overall because they did go away pretty excited and feeling competent to teach the piece that we had given them, maybe not go beyond that of making that connection between Rome and their own backyard. So they probably weren't going to do that. I mean, I'd be really doubtful. That would be in that example that I looked at before. If we could follow up and find out if they did that, that would be really helpful. And also what the kids got from it, that would be really helpful. One more slide. So the implications for this is that we would now like to start assessing content knowledge and inquiry-based skills and learning and motivation for every project archaeology workshop that we do, not just the did you like it, did you not like it, did you feel okay about it, but really start looking at did they gain some content knowledge, did they gain ability with skills in inquiry-based learning and motivation to do it, and then really would like to look into this resistance to including science and history, and that I think is a huge question for us as archaeologists, and I'll get into it more in a little bit here. And then also that making that, actually remember the white boxes, so we didn't get anywhere close to with these teachers to looking at what student achievement actually was with them, so that would be the next thing to do. And so this is also called pedagogical content knowledge for teachers. This could be a doctoral dissertation for somebody to find out how well we're doing with our professional development. What do teachers need? Are we giving it to them? And then does that make a difference for student achievement? So any PhD students want to come forward and do this research, we'd love to have you. Okay, thank you. Question? Yeah. Okay, okay.
So the question, Jeanne, is you're just starting to do this more detailed assessment, and you had a sample pool. An artist, an art teacher, maybe they went into those fields because science and math maybe was a little hard for them. So the question is, I wouldn't be too worried because
right.
I think that more and more teachers are looking at interdisciplinary stuff. So I'm going to text you that. The problem with classical archaeology, it's changing now too.
teachers would get excited about the geoarchaeology, but you know, it's a highly skewed sample. You know, they're into what they do, and we need a much more broad and general sample to really see that. So that's the doctoral dissertation.
Great. Next we have investigating a shotgun house, piloting a new project archaeology shelter investigation. Gwynn, Henderson, and Levstik.
Let me see. This is kind of back pointer. Next. Next. Ah, okay. Okay.
This one goes back and that one is.
Okay, good.
That's what I asked.
Oh, okay. Green needs to go. Okay. Who knew shelter was so emotionally charged? So wrote one of the participants who had just attended our Teachers Academy, Making History Local, an inquiry-based approach, and who had just participated in the first trial run of investigating a shotgun house, number 12 in the Project Archaeology Investigating Shelter case studies. Who knew, indeed? Who knew that the unit's straightforward guiding question, what can we learn about the lives of urban, working-class people by investigating a shotgun house, explored by 5th, 6th, and 7th grade students a few months later, would open up a conversation about race and class, about what is important in history to preserve? Who could have foreseen that the students would become so engaged that they would yearn to live in an integrated neighborhood like the one that they were studying? Certainly Linda and I didn't. Sure, we thought the kids would enjoy it. I mean, what kids don't like to learn about the lives of other kids? And aren't all kids interested in body function at that age, including poop? We were confident the teachers would recognize the many ways the unit met their curriculum needs, and we hoped that we had adequately handled common stumbling blocks to learning, such as inappropriate reading level, confusing graphs and charts, ambiguous discussion type questions. But wow, the powerful humanities themes that emerged during instruction. Our paper today begins with a brief consideration of the whys and the whos and so forth, and then it moves to our research findings. We consider briefly what we learned from discussions with the teachers. Then we spend the rest of our time sharing our discoveries concerning what the students learned and how what they learned influenced their ideas about preservation issues. What is investigating shelter? Yes. Well, I'm glad you asked. Developed for grades 3 through 5, Project Archaeology Investigating Shelter is designed to teach basic inquiry skills that emphasize archaeological questions, sources, and techniques to support a preservation ethic. Students apply these skills to investigate a particular shelter chosen by their teacher from an array of case studies. Investigating a shotgun house is one of these case studies. Students consider the guiding question I just mentioned as it pertains to the shotgun houses in Davis Bottom, a poor working-class community in Lexington, Kentucky. The neighborhood developed after the Civil War as a community for free and newly freed African Americans. Later, immigrants and Appalachian out-migrants turned Davis Bottom into Lexington's first integrated neighborhood. In 1931, a proposal for the construction of a new road threatened to destroy the neighborhood. Though postponed, the specter of destruction still loomed, leading to infrastructure neglect. Absentee landlords let the cheaply built shotgun houses deteriorate, and so eventually Davis Bottom became the poorest neighborhood in Lexington. Nearly 60 years later, the city of Lexington revived the road project. Archaeological and social impact assessments were carried out, archaeological investigations were undertaken, and residents were moved to nearby trailers while the road and new houses and apartments were built. As part of this shelter investigation, students explore the size of a shotgun house. They use a map of the archaeological site at 712 DeRody Street, privy stratigraphy, and images and information on artifacts similar to the ones found in the privy and in the house excavations to establish a context for their study. Archival and manuscript sources, including Sanborn fire insurance maps, U.S. federal census records, recordings of interviews with black and white residents, and historic photographs, provide further evidence of what life was like in the neighborhood. Now let me describe our project. It consisted of a week-long teacher's academy, in-class piloting of investigating the shotgun house as part of teaching the investigating shelter curriculum, and data collection from students and teachers. It was funded by the Nashville District Army Corps of Engineers. The Corps wanted to train southeastern Kentucky teachers in investigating shelter as a way to reduce the negative impact of the drawdown of Lake Cumberland to repair the dam, which had exposed archaeological sites to looting along the lakeshore. They reasoned that by training teachers, they would enhance the protection and preservation of archaeological sites exposed at Lake Cumberland, as well as those in surrounding regions. Our case study pilot explored how well the curriculum served as a model for inquiry-based teaching approaches and techniques in history and social studies education. This was different from previous investigating shelter case study pilots, which focused on examining the curriculum's success as culturally relevant science education. Our project had three purposes. First, we wanted to understand how historical archaeological inquiry might inform students' ideas about the significance of working-class people's lives and, by extension, the lives of other people often underrepresented in the historical record. Second, we wanted to examine how well the unit promoted deep conceptual understanding of how humanities subjects inform the development of a preservation ethic. And finally, in a more tangible vein, we wanted to evaluate investigating the shotgun house by field testing its usability before we finalized it. Okay, so the pilot study. After the academy, 4 participants volunteered to pilot investigating shelter in their classroom during the 2014-2015 school year. These teachers were experienced educators, 2 taught in 5th grade, 1 in grade 6, 1 in 7th grade. They used a revised draft of investigating a shotgun house. The schools within which they taught were located in rural or small town locales. Student populations were predominantly European American and Protestant, and a large proportion were on free and reduced lunches, which is an indication of economic disadvantage. Out of a total of 121 students who received instruction, over half were 5th graders. A total of 67 students participated in the pilot study. Instructional contexts were highly variable across the 4 classrooms. In addition, we purposefully did not dictate to the teachers how they should teach the unit because we wanted our data to reflect how real teachers used it. Our data sources consisted of identical written surveys administered before and after instruction, post-pilot interviews, there's Linda interviewing students, and teachers, interviews with teachers and students, classroom observations on our part, and instructional artifacts generated by students individually and in groups. So let's turn to the research findings. The research results we present here come mainly from our analysis of the teacher and student interviews, supplemented with information drawn from the other data sources where relevant. So we'll begin with the teachers. Okay, there they are. 2 of those teachers were the pilot teachers. With respect to broad issues, these teachers were able to integrate elements of investigating shelter and investigating a shotgun house into their ongoing social studies and language arts curricula. They said that using primary sources was a rich experience for their students, and they reported that their students were able to tie what they had learned into their tested content, which is a very important thing. Our research results suggest that these teachers did not use inquiry to its fullest potential, however. Like other studies, ours found that inquiry is a challenging instructional approach, especially if teachers have not had training and practice in doing it. Despite this, neither the teachers nor their students reported having serious problems with the unit's inquiry aspects. In terms of concrete issues, time constraints posed a significant challenge. The Investigating Shelter Curriculum Guide estimates instructional time at around 1 month, or 18 hours. Our teachers reported instructional times ranging from a low of 19 hours to a high of 45 hours. Because of these time constraints, the teachers made adjustments and thus content coverage varied. For example, they eliminated particular lessons. Ones they considered redundant, they left out entire sections or chose to focus almost exclusively on the shotgun house case study. Only 1 teacher taught all of the lessons. Now for the students. We searched student interview transcripts for evidence of their understanding of the past and how that understanding influenced their ideas about preservation issues. So first, understanding the past. We found that archaeological study was a powerful tool for introducing concepts and skills specific to inquiry and basic to historical thinking: agency, cause and effect, chronology, evidence, and perspective. Let's examine perspective in a little more detail because it's here that our findings are most compelling. A number of scholars have pointed out that perspective recognition requires empathy. But empathy is influenced by personal identities. So we expected that personal identity with respect to both class and race would influence these students' perspective about the people who lived in these shotgun houses. And it did, although not necessarily in the ways we anticipated. Students tended to identify strongly with the perspectives of people who they saw as similar to them socioeconomically. They saw something of themselves in the people of Davis Bottom and described their shotgun shelter inquiry as a rare instance in which they studied, quote, just normal people like how we are, unquote. This was reflected in all interviews. This level of identification kept students engaged in the ongoing inquiry, but it also helped them recognize why Davis Bottom residents saw their history as significant and wanted to preserve it. But students also identified with the perspectives of people who were different from them in terms of race and ethnicity. We were surprised and encouraged to learn this, even though, in many ways, the students' discussions of race were naive and tended to emphasize the more positive comments in the sources they examined. Their comments showed that they longed to live in a peacefully integrated neighborhood like Davis Bottom, and they admired friendship patterns that were not race-based. This was a feature of all but one of the 67 student interviews. So what's so important about this finding? It represents the impact of an instructional shift. And Linda coached me here to say, this is really, really cool and important, because what it means is the conversation about race went from an inevitable problem to race as a fact of human communities. And we think that in part this shift appears to be a function of an archaeological emphasis on the guiding question: what can a Davis Bottom shotgun house tell us about the lives of poor working class people? And on archaeological and historical sources, material culture, documents, and oral histories that provided insider perspectives to help students answer the question. Two other points we'd like to make. Our findings are similar to others who note that when historical questions require students to, quote, interpret texts, make connections, solve problems, support or dispute ideas, or ask further questions, students more often ask critical questions related to civic life. Unfortunately, such experiences occur most often in schools with high socioeconomic status and low diversity. A major contribution of our study is that it shows that students who attend low socioeconomic status schools, although still with low diversity, also can enjoy and benefit from inquiry-based instruction. Teachers' reports and our own observations showed that with the scaffolding built into the shotgun house case study, students had little difficulty in using multiple material culture and documentary sources to build evidence-based historical interpretations or in connecting their study to a preservation ethic. Holy mackerel. 2, as powerful as the guiding question was in shaping student inquiry, material objects, documents, and oral histories also shaped these students' responses. An archaeological emphasis in particular provided material evidence of residents' habits and activities. We should note that few of the sources in investigating a shotgun house presented outsiders' analysis of the community or approached its existence as a problem. These sources privileged, for example, the lives of Davis Bottom's children and the community's perspective about the road. This was a purposeful decision on our part during the development of the shotgun house case study. We did not include sources that stereotyped or denigrated the neighborhood or used derogatory terms to describe it like slum, although multiple sources described it as a slum. If anything, the perspectives represented in these sources led students to romanticize rather than demonize Davis Bottom. Despite this fact, Photographs certainly showed how poor the community would have looked to outsiders, and the census data revealed the menial jobs held by the residents. Still, in all but one fifth-grade classroom, students looked beyond houses in disrepair and wage labor jobs to search out details of lives whose historical significance they concluded should be remembered. These sources also presented government encroachment, road widening, and the resultant demolition of houses, and the residents' wish for some way of preserving their history as the problem space in a peacefully integrated, fully functioning, poor, working-class community. Thus, the students' study of Davis Bottom offered an alternative to the common conception and prevailing local attitudes of racial identity and racial separation. Now let's move to our second analytical question concerning the students' ideas about preservation and civic agency. Students were strongly in favor of preserving aspects of ordinary people's lives and recognizing histories that might otherwise be invisible. They identified a moral and ethical component to preservation. The majority thought it was a bad idea to demolish Davis Bottom to make way for a major road, not just because a significant history and community would be lost, because this would not have happened in a wealthier neighborhood. Despite their concern that Davis Bottom would be destroyed, and indeed it was destroyed, all but small portions of it, students struggled to explain what alternatives might have been available to people on any of the various sides of this public issue, or how students might have intervened at any point over the years. The students knew that people could complain to the government, but they weren't exactly sure what that meant. Students also struggled with civic agency, and civic agency is a significant part of investigating a shotgun house. That part, however, was the most frequently omitted portion of the unit. Thus, it's unclear how these students would have performed had they worked through the relevant portions of the unit, and it remains to be seen what impact those lessons would have had. As promising as our results are, we should mention some of the challenges our study uncovered. Welcome to the real world. These teachers' instruction was governed by time, or its lack, and by curricular constraints imposed by mandated state and national standards. It was also impacted by administrative support, or lack thereof. We need to remember that it's not enough to train teachers in inquiry. Administrators need to understand and value unfamiliar pedagogies as well. Weather delays stretched out project implementation way beyond what we had planned, and we worried that student attention would wander and that their enthusiasm would wane. However, the bad weather was a gift of sorts. We were able to see that teachers could adapt investigating a shotgun house easily to different time constraints, but perhaps the best outcome of the bad weather was that it revealed the unit's staying power. This unit sustained interest despite interruptions and over sometimes quite long periods of time, which serves as a testimony to its motivational power. That said, the civic connections were the first to go when time was an issue, and sometimes when it wasn't. And this could simply have been a matter of omitting the civic connections because they came at the end of the unit. And if that's true, that's an easy fix. We'll just move some of the connections to earlier in the unit. However, we suspect that ditching the civic connections had less to do with time and had more to do with the teacher's lack of comfort teaching civic connections. Teachers need scaffolding to approach inquiry confidently, and we hypothesize that this is even more the case with teaching civic engagement. And now, this, as John Oliver would say, studying shelter involves studying the people's shelter, the size and composition of households, the impacts for good and ill of the shelter type on the lives lived within it, and the day-to-day social, cultural, and economic activities of residents of all ages and statuses. We hope we have illustrated how, considered in this manner, shelter is indeed an emotionally charged topic. But so what? We have 2 points. Research in education has documented that a single experience may motivate student interest and introduce or expand knowledge and skills, but it rarely, fundamentally, and permanently changes students' perception of history, or in this case, archaeology, the challenges of site protection and preservation, and the role students should play as citizens in making decisions regarding the preservation of our cultural resources. And that may be true of the students who experienced investigating shelter unit. These students may not necessarily apply their analyses of race relations in Davis Bottom to future encounters across racial boundaries in their own lives, but our study does show that investigating a shotgun house offers the curricular space for a necessary conversation about race and class, and that it challenges students to think about the issues surrounding site protection and preservation of our historic resources, and we think these are good things. We'd like to close by saying, in the general media, students are exposed to issues concerning save the fill in the blank, save the whales, save the planet, save whatever. Our pre-instruction survey showed that students are not blank slates when it comes to issues relating to site protection and preservation, although not specifically about looting maybe or collecting artifacts from prehistoric sites. Students know that stealing is wrong. They know that something, if it's important, should be saved. In some cases, they also know that saving our heritage is influenced by financial considerations, such that looting objects to sell for money in a depressed economic situation trumps historic preservation and site protection. The important issue here is not for students to come away from curricular experiences like investigating shelter, thinking that every archaeological site or every historic building must be saved. What they need to be exposed to, and we would contend adults in the general population as well, are issues relating to sustainable development. They need opportunities to be introduced to what it means to strike a balance between the living and the needs to preserve the past, and how to take into consideration the historical merit of archaeological sites and historic structures, and understand the ways in which the old and new can be blended. Understanding the historic context of an archaeological site provides them with the information they need to understand what should be preserved for the future. Our study shows that students as young as elementary school can manage the conversation and should be exposed to the ambiguity of the kinds of answers that are realistic when it comes to site protection and preservation. We know of no other curriculum available today that considers these themes in site protection and preservation in such a manner as Project Archaeology Investigating Shelter. Thank you.
It's me again. This next paper is from my doctoral dissertation, which I finished in 2011, and titled it Archaeological Inquiry in Integrating Science and Social Studies. So that alluded to that a little earlier, and Gwynn brought that up a little bit in her paper too. And I think that this is a huge research opportunity for us. Oh, and okay, there we go. All right. So the problem, looking at this, we think of archaeology as interdisciplinary teaching and learning, and we're kind of all about that. We're really proud of that. We just say archaeology seamlessly integrates many, many subjects, especially science and history or science and social studies in the classroom. So, but what is, the second part of that is, what is students' conceptual understanding of interdisciplinary research? And I found that to be a problem in my dissertation because I found very little research on that. Everybody says we should be doing interdisciplinary teaching and learning, but I found no real research on what kids get out of that, especially between science and history. There's a little bit between math and science, but that's kind of a no-brainer. You can't do science without math. So there was some research there, but I found one article dated 1991, unpublished, on the Erika file that actually looked at this issue of integrating science and history in the classroom and what students actually understood about it, and found out that they were actually kind of confused about the two. So that, I think that's kind of an unintended consequence of my dissertation, but something that I'd really like to look at a little more, and took this opportunity to do so. Okay, so science literacy since late 80s has been with the science project, the Science 2061 project. realizing that Americans are not, so this is in the United States, understanding that Americans are not really very scientifically literate, and that everybody should be scientifically literate by the year 2061. And they picked that year because that was the next year that Halley's Comet was going to come by. So I didn't know that. The nature of science, in other words, how science works, or NOS as it's commonly abbreviated as, is a very big part of science literacy. And then I looked at science literacy, the nature of science, and then I wanted to know what the differences that the kids saw between science and history, and what they saw as being similar. Okay, my research questions were, what do students think science is, and how do students understand the relationship between science, history, and archaeology? And of course, we see it, or at least I see it, I think most people see it, is it's kind of right up here at the middle. So we've got big history, science is part of that, social studies in general, especially things like geography are there. So kind of archaeology is right dead center right there. It kind of overlaps all three of them. And that's cool. Okay, so then get into the nitty-gritty of this nature of science. It's really difficult to define the term because it essentially asks, what is science? And that's a really big question for kids to answer. But it's also considered of paramount importance in science literacy by the people who do a lot of science literacy work. But you're asking a really broad question with that one. And I think that's maybe part of the issue with it. So my methods were a case study. I worked with 27 fifth grade students who received instruction in project archaeology and investigating the Poplar Forest slave cabin, which is similar to the shotgun that Gwynn just reported on, only it's slave quarters in Virginia. And so they got the instruction with these two pieces, and then I interviewed them and worked with them on several levels. So it's a complete archaeological investigation of the slave cabin, and there were 9 lessons, which Gwynn talked a little bit about, and I was working a lot with these tools of scientific inquiry, observation, inference, evidence, context, and classification. So those were the main part of my dissertation that I was looking at. And here's just some visuals. So here's the investigating shelter. So the students got some information about what this cabin would have looked like if we could see it today. Here's the map that the archaeologists made out of that. And they looked at artifacts that would be in that place there. So they were working as archaeologists, placing the artifacts back in context and then seeing what kind of, by observing and inferring and using evidence, classifying, putting them in context, what conclusions could they draw from this information. And because it's an investigation, it flows. We start with essential questions, and then goes through a series of lessons with the conceptual tools of archaeology. And here's lesson 8, that's the actual investigation. And the stewardship part of it that we're very interested in, and as Wayne mentioned, teachers sometimes left that out because they might have been uncomfortable with it in her study. That didn't happen here. And then the final performance of understanding is realizing that archaeology just isn't in Egypt, but it's right here, and we're making decisions about that all the time. Okay, so here's the kids looking at some modern artifacts as analogs for older artifacts, and then from the Poplar Forest artifacts as well. So that's what it looked like. And then I used several formative learning assessment probes, and some of them were really clever, I thought, if I do say so myself. This one was not so clever, but I just wanted to know what the students thought that science was and how they related science and history. And to back up just a little bit, the students I was working with were actually in history class, but then I was asking them about science. So that might be part of what we're thinking about here with it. So first of all, I just asked them, what is science? And to get their idea of it. Second of all, what do you think history is? And then how are they similar? How are they different? And then I asked them, can you be a scientist? Because that's one thing that we really want to know is, as science educators, do you think that you have the ability to be a scientist, and do you want to be? So those were the questions that I asked the kids. So, some results. So most of the students had a fairly naive or incomplete understanding of the nature of science. In other words, they thought of science here as doing. So it was something that you were always doing. And that's understandable because they were learning from FOSS, F-O-S-S, which I don't remember what that stands for, but it's trunks of experiments that the kids do. So they get sent to the classrooms, and it's all about experimentation. So they think of science as doing. So that's pretty understandable. A few students, looks like 5, thought of it as studying, and only 3 students really thought of it as building knowledge. And of course, that's the one we want. We want students to think of science as a way to build knowledge. It's not just doing, it's not just studying, but that's how we build knowledge. Happily, most of the students thought that they had the ability to be a scientist. It was in 27 students, and almost all of them thought that if you studied and worked hard, you could be a scientist. So that was good results from that. Okay, so for the results continued for the history, most of the, and I'll show you a chart in just a minute, most of the students thought it was the study of the past and people of the past. Okay, good. And inquiry process, they noticed that science and history use some of the same processes. It's inquiry. So you have a question, you gather data, you use evidence. So just like science, history does the very same thing. So it's all about inquiry. So that's really cool. See that? So with archaeology, many of the students, but not all, recognize that archaeology is both science and a history, which is what I was hoping for. So here's that graph again. So 15 of the 27 students thought it was about the past and about past people, so they had a good response to that. So not as many as I would have liked, but most of them got that. A lot of the students, 20 students, recognized that the processes were the same, so I thought that was very interesting. And then some of them thought that they used some of the same data, but not all. So they did differentiate from the data that historians are using a different kind of data, usually than scientists. And a few thought that the processes were very much the same between both. So these are the kids that got that archaeology and is both science and history. All right, so some conclusions and implications. So most of these students retained a very naive understanding of the nature of science as doing and then not building knowledge. And so that's an interesting thing, and I think that's be a really interesting thing for science educators to look at in general. And then second of all, as I mentioned before, there's very little research on interdisciplinary learning, and especially students' conceptual understanding of what that is. Archaeology, of course, could be a broader vehicle for this kind of research because we're using science and history all of the time. So we could certainly do that. Do I have any more slides? I don't think I do. So I think with the idea of broader research, I think that could be a National Science Foundation grant, just because there's so little research in that area, and there's such a push to do more integrated sorts of things. And from an archaeological standpoint, it would behoove us to show that we do interdisciplinary teaching and learning, but at the same time, we've got to show the teachers how to do it, because they were a little confused by it. The teacher was a little confused by it, and then also the students were a little confused by what we were teaching them. So it might be a question of putting in some graphic organizers for differentiating between history and science. This is an example of history, this is an example of science, and this is an example of how the two could be interdisciplinary. But just to say that, okay, this is interdisciplinary and it's great, we might be shooting ourselves in the foot with that. because it confuses the teachers, and I think it confuses the students even a little bit more. And, okay, I've got some time left here. Does anybody have any quick questions, but we'll try to catch up on time? Yes?
You said that your conclusions were that the school children were not only came to the understanding of the nature of science. I assume this is for American students.
Yes.
Do you have any indication how that would compare to students in other countries?
I don't. From that, in general, from the, at the time I was doing this, which was in 2009 or so when I was doing my field work, I mean, the push for science literacy was because Americans were very much behind in science literacy from other countries, from many other, not all other countries, but many other countries. And it was a push to catch American students up with that. And at the time, students did really well up until the 4th grade, and they compared with all other countries, or above, or at least as good as other students in other countries. By the 8th grade, they were starting to drop a little bit, and by 12th grade, they were dropping a lot. So something was really falling off in science education in high schools at the time. And I haven't looked at the data since then to see how we're doing. That's a really good question. Anything else? Yeah, Becky.
So, all your research has kind of been putting science into the social studies. Has any discussion or thought been put into putting the social studies into the science? Like going to a science classroom and showing the capability of the science?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I did not do my dissertation on that. I think that Gwynn and Linda have been working more in that direction from the social studies aspect of it and putting that together. So I think that's a really good piece. And what I found when I started my dissertation was that nobody looked at archaeology and science. So that's what I picked. Giovanna, one more.
My perception is that the types of teachers who are drawn to project archaeology, and sometimes the promotional material, maybe I'm thinking just for Vermont, is social studies teachers. And so the sample is very much social studies teachers. And from your expertise, because you see such a huge sample, what would be sort of a general proportion between science teachers coming to train in project archaeology, either by you personally in Montana or across the country, in the Gwynn kind of programs, versus non-scientists? Because maybe we really need to, as you speak to exactly what you were saying, where we need to promote specifically to science teachers and start pushing, because they perhaps can get it better. They are scientists, so they can help the cross-link better. So
Good.
what's the proportion?
Yeah, good point. And actually one of the pilot teachers we had was a scientist before he became an elementary teacher, and he did the best with the curriculum of any of our pilot teachers because he was a scientist. I mean, he just totally got it. I would say that probably, I would say nationally probably we get more social studies teachers, but what we try to do is show them, okay, you can use this to teach social studies, but you can do your science at the same time, and usually they have time for neither. So if we can put the two together, and I think that's a real strength that we have, but if we're gonna do that, we've gotta show them how to do it and make sure that the kids get that conceptually, understand that conceptually. And right now, I'm not sure how to do that, but that's another dissertation, I think. So. Okay, I will.
Do you want to use my phone?
Your paper next. Okay, I'll introduce this paper, and because it's back up, Archaeology Fairs Measuring Informal Learning.
Thank you. Let me reset this really fast. Great, I'm excited that you're all here. informal way of teaching the public about the many facets of archaeology, often held in connection with the state's Archaeology Month or the Archaeological Institute of America's International Day of Archaeology. These fairs are an important facet of public outreach. It was estimated in a recent publication that archaeology fairs attract over 50,000 people annually, are most often held and organized by museums, and usually are attended by less than 500 people per day that the archaeology fair goes on. Whatever the size or location, the main goal for many of these fairs is to introduce a community to its local archaeological resources and convey basic archaeological concepts to the public. Archaeology fairs and archaeology education in general can all benefit from increased research. With over 50,000 people attending these fairs and very little research being completed, how can we know what the audience is taking away from our programming? Calls to action for assessing archaeology education abound, and most recently from the SAA's Advances in Archaeological Practice Special Edition, focusing on designing and assessing public education programs in archaeology. Eleanor King's introductory article in that issue calls for broadly applicable lessons to be taken from case studies and more sustainable to continue promising programs. More sustainability to continue promising programs. In 2015, the Archaeology Institute of America began a push to measure informal learning at its International Day of Archaeology fairs held in October every year. That year, Project Archaeology, a not-for-profit archaeology education program, began efforts to research and measure informal learning at Junior Archaeology Day. We realized a need to measure the effects of our own program and decided to do so on this day, which is held in conjunction with Montana's Archaeology Month at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana. That first year, 2015, we received 7 completed pre-tests and post-tests due to poor participation. Although this was a small sample size, it was apparent that there was almost complete misunderstanding about the differences between paleontology and archaeology, which is what we consider to be the basic premise of Junior Archaeology Day. So in 2016, the program was revamped to better address this issue, the small sample size, and other perceived challenges. In 2016, we received 17 completed pre-tests and post-tests. So this paper will discuss the changes that we made to Junior Archaeology Day between 2015 and 2016, the results of our research, and the difficulties of hosting an archaeology fair in a paleontology museum, and best practices for measuring informal learning. Montana's Junior Archaeology Day is held in April during Archaeology Month at the Museum of the Rockies, a nationally recognized museum affiliated with the Smithsonian Institute and Montana State University. It is known for its extensive collection of dinosaur fossils. The museum itself is organized by geologic time. Let me see. Starting with the planetarium in the lobby, moving through landforms, the rise of dinosaurs, it skips to native peoples in Montana, Montana's frontier history, and ends with the current special exhibit. This presented us with a dilemma that is far from unique: how to convey archaeological concepts in a museum dedicated to and known for its paleontology collections. The responses in 2015 show that almost all participants and attendees did not understand the difference between paleontology and archaeology. Based on this small but revealing study, our co-author, Nichole Tramel, and Project Archaeology's Bureau of Land Management lead, Dr. Jeanne, decided to implement significant changes to the 2016 Junior Archaeology Day. Other Project Archaeology staff and volunteers involved with the Junior Archaeology Day include Alegria, Courtney Agenten, Angie Weichert, and my co-author, Erika Malo. 2015's Junior Archaeology Day was the same as the previous 8 years. 7 stations were located throughout the museum, engaging participants in activities exploring the wide world of archaeology. Activities were located in the special exhibit hall, the entrance hall, the history hall, and the auditorium. One table at the entrance demonstrated the difference between archaeology and paleontology by separating dinosaur fossils and human-based artifacts. Our other activities included a dress like an archaeologist photo booth, flint knapping and fire starting demonstrations, artifact analyses, hieroglyphic creations, and survey and mapping with Project Archaeology's Plains TV floor map. Only 7 completed pre-tests and post-tests were recorded, with most showing little to no change in knowledge after the completion of worksheets and activity stations. Due to these results, we changed the orientation and layout of the day, the worksheet packet, and the activities. Excuse me. As an enduring understanding, we hoped in 2016 to convey the concept that archaeologists study the human past. In 2016, we decided to use the layout of the Museum of the Rockies to our advantage by limiting archaeological activities to only areas that dealt with the human past. We limited entry points to the Junior Archaeology Day activities to eliminate the problem of participants completing some activities and not others. Signage directing participants was increased, and volunteers physically directed participants to the stations in the specific order. These changes helped meet participants' physiological and safety needs, increasing their chances of understanding and retaining information as described by Maslow's hierarchy of needs. 3 activities in a row were based on differentiating between archaeology and paleontology, increasing the repetition of this core concept. In 2015, the table in the lobby differentiating the 2 disciplines, archaeology and paleontology, did not work as a good introduction to the study of archaeology. Parents would often send their kids over to the booth while they went to go buy tickets, and then the parent would return to reinforce the misconception that archaeologists dig dinosaurs. We changed the wording in our worksheet packets to help parents become facilitators for the participants. A new worksheet packet was created to go along with the redesigned scaffolding of the day. The packet was adapted from the Midwest Archaeological Center and originally meant to be taken home. Nichole Tramel, our co-author, redesigned it to include more active on-site learning. Symbols at the top of the page denoted that age-appropriate activities, we divided them into ages 6 and younger, 7 through 9, and 10 and up. The misconception that archaeologists study dinosaurs was addressed repeatedly in the worksheets, specifically to help parents facilitate the learning of this concept for the participants. As the worksheet described, quote, both archaeologists and paleontologists excavate, they dig in the ground, to find things from the past. They both scientifically study history, use similar tools, and may study plants and animals of the past, but they do it for different reasons, unquote. The packet was used to reinforce the information that was learned at our several activity booths. The redesigned activities for 2016 were more focused on differentiating archaeology and paleontology. We cut out all the fluff of our program, and there was no hieroglyphic creation or flint knapping demonstrations. Each station was specifically focused on how archaeologists understand the human past, and program facilitators were prepped to convey that concept to all the participants. Beginning in the lobby and the special exhibit hall, the participants tested their knowledge on the difference between the 2 disciplines by categorizing artifacts into archaeology, paleontology, or both columns. The artifact analysis asked participants to observe artifacts and question who might have used them, what they might have been used for, and when and where it might have been used. Participants also completed a timeline activity, interpreted garbage in the garbology station, and mapped an archaeological site set up on a sheet of plastic. These activities were located through the special exhibit hall and the history hall. And at the end of the Native American exhibit, where it changes into the dinosaur exhibit, we set up a wrap-up activity before participants took our post-test. Meet the Ologist was the final performance of understanding, where participants interviewed 2 different ologists to determine which was the paleontologist and which was the archaeologist. Not only was this an engaging way to finish the series of activities, but it helped both adults and student participants talk through what they had learned throughout the museum. This research on the understanding of archaeological concepts in an informal setting was a collaboration between Montana State University, Project Archaeology, and the Museum of the Rockies. Institutional Review Board approval was received to study the effects of public programs on student understanding of archaeology concepts. Participants of this study were self-selected and voluntary, and incentive was given to complete the worksheets and the pre- and post-tests. We gave them 20% off at the museum bookstore. Participants were given a participant code to connect the pre-tests and the post-tests while protecting participant identities. Demographic data was also recorded, including gender, birthday, hometown, and whether or not students had previously learned about archaeology. So significant changes were made to the Junior Archaeology Day program between 2015 and 2016, including restructuring the pre-test and the post-test. The 2015 test asked the same 4 questions on both the pre-test and the post-test. And the 2016 pre-test and post-test and demographic information was all combined onto the same page. The 2016 pre-test and post-test only asked participants to define the word archaeology and to draw a picture of an archaeologist. Volunteers at the pre-test and post-test tables asked the questions to children who could not read and attempted to write exactly what the participants stated. The 2016 pre-test and post-tests were coded by myself February of this year, and I coded them on a 4-point scale, with 0 meaning nothing written, 1 some content written, not necessarily archaeology related, 2 some archaeology content knowledge, and 3 a complete understanding of archaeology as a study of the human past. So, the results. The results clearly show a gain of knowledge about archaeology as the study of the human past. A majority of participants had some content written during the pretest that did not necessarily apply to archaeology. In the post-test, all of the participants had at least some knowledge of archaeological concepts, and 70% understood that archaeology is the study of the human past. Demographic data showed that the sample was split almost evenly between male and female participants. Over 60% of the participants were between ages 7 and 9, with 3 being older than 10 and 2 being younger than 6. Interestingly, 82% of the participants responded positively to the question of whether they had previously learned about archaeology. This is in stark contrast to the pretest results that show most participants had little knowledge about archaeology prior to Junior Archaeology Day activities. Participants reported that this previous knowledge came from a multitude of sources, including schools, parents, museums, books, TV shows, and youth organizations. As I discussed before, it is incredibly important that case studies have clear, broadly applicable lessons for them to be helpful in increasing the amount of research in archaeology education. This case study presents 4 obtainable objectives to improve your informal learning research. 1, have a major goal or enduring understanding, use simple measuring instruments, obtain clear results, and use an observer. Our major goal is to create a conceptual understanding of archaeology as a study of the human past, and so we tailored our event specifically to that framework. All of our activities, our worksheets, our volunteers, and assessment questions were organized to convey this message and measure how well we conveyed it. Keep it simple. Our pretest and post-test had just 2 questions. The Archaeology Institute of America's pretest and post-test have 4 questions. By keeping the assessment simple, it is easier to obtain clear results. These results can be used to assess if your major goal or enduring understanding was reached. We also found it very useful to have a volunteer walking around the museum, observing what participants were doing throughout the stations. This allowed us immediate feedback on how participants navigated the museum, interactions between parents and participants, and energy level of the participants. Understanding how much the guiding adults conveyed misconceptions to participants in our 2015 program led us to make changes in the wording in the worksheet. And targeting parents as facilitators seemed to help many kids understand archaeology concepts better in 2016. In conclusion, informal learning research improved our Junior Archaeology Day. It's as simple as that. We set clear goals, we capitalized on the layout of the museum, we kept our pre-test and post-test simple, and we implemented changes based on results and observations from the previous year. Even though 2015 provided us with only 7 pre-tests and post-tests, we were able to improve conceptual understanding of archaeological concepts. Informal learning research works, and Project Archaeology will continue our efforts to learn more about how to best teach archaeological concepts informally. We hope that you will continue or begin your own informal learning research and share those results with the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Becca. I'm taking a little bit different approach than the previous papers on my presentation today. I'm from the perspective of an archaeologist and not an archaeology educator. I'm not part of the Project Archaeology team or group, but I count myself as very fortunate for having worked closely with Project Archaeology folks for many years because of our association at Montana State University in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. So what I'm looking at is informal science education from the perspective of on-site interpretive centers at Bison kill sites. There are at least 8 interpretive centers like this, as far north as Alberta and Saskatchewan, and all the way down to Texas in the Great Plains. And my perspective on this is, as an archaeologist who carried out archaeological investigations at one of these, the First Peoples Buffalo Jump near Great Falls, Montana, and who has become quite interested over the years in archaeology education for a couple of reasons. One is because an interpretive center eventually was built at First Peoples Buffalo Jump, and I had some input into that, although I wasn't the driving force behind that. And also, especially because of my association with Project Archaeology folks in Jeanne. We were undergraduates together and worked at a Bison kill site in Montana a number of years ago, and Alegria worked at First Peoples Buffalo Jump as a student when we had archaeological field school there. So I've come to appreciate over the years that that archaeology education is at least as important as the archaeology research that I have done myself. So I'm very pleased to try and learn more myself about archaeology education. My presentation has two parts. More briefly, the first part, pretty quickly, I'm going to look at the question of what is our message, and this is from the perspective of archaeologists, myself specifically, but some other archaeologists whom I'm familiar with also who have carried out research at Bison kill sites, and what is it that we as archaeologists think is important for the public to learn about, and then secondly, and I'll go into a little bit more depth and length about this, is what is the long-term sustainability of on-site interpretive centers at Bison kill sites. Briefly, if you're not familiar with Bison kill sites, you might wonder why in the heck are there at least eight interpretive centers at Bison kill sites, and part of the answer is that, this is another reason I've become interested in archaeology education on site, is that I joined the late Les Davis in co-editing this book about the on-site interpretation of Bison kill sites, so that this process of being involved with this book got me much more actively involved with the interpretation and education aspect of things. So there are a couple of reasons, several reasons why there are interpretive centers at Bison kill sites. One is that Bison kill sites, some of them at least, are cliff jumps that are rather imposing, so that for the public visitors, it's kind of an impressive place to visit. Second is that in many cases, Bison kill sites have extensive bone beds, so once again, that's something that's pretty impressive to visitors, and something that the interpretive facilities can take to their advantage, use to their advantage in trying to get their message. And oftentimes, likewise, Bison kill sites have lots of artifacts, spear points, arrow points, and so forth, and this is something that also the public finds interesting oftentimes. And finally, just the scale of bison procurement and bison killing is pretty amazing. This is from one of the chapters in that book that I showed you a couple slides ago, and Jack Brinks makes an effective case, I think, that the scale of bison killing is something that was enormous, and this is again something that visitors and the public find interesting. So briefly, starting with what is our message, what is it that archaeologists, at least some of us who are represented in that book, think is important. I'm going to present briefly what I think is a good example of what archaeologists feel is an important, good example in the sense that I, as an archaeologist, feel, wow, these guys did a great job in presenting the information that might be compelling to visitors. But the bigger message that I've learned out of all of this is that the people, archaeologists aren't and haven't been the only people who formulate what the message is at these interpretive centers. There are other very appropriate groups and peoples who should be involved. And as I highlighted one at the bottom, again, through my experience over the years participating with the project archaeology folks, is that I think that archaeology education specialists should have a big role in helping to formulate what the message is for the public. But among archaeologists, this is a passage from Les Davis in his introduction to this book, the authenticity representing archaeology as it really is to archaeologists is an important theme to Les Davis and myself. In the passage from the chapter that Tramel and I wrote about First Peoples buffalo jumping and the process of archaeology, presenting the process to the public so that they understand that we don't necessarily come up with the final answers that are eternal, but rather that archaeology is a dynamic, ongoing discipline, and with new knowledge and new theoretical perspectives, our answers might change someday. And briefly, I'll use a quick example to explore this theme, and that is that the Hudson Bend site, which was excavated during 2 rounds of excavation, earlier in the 1970s by Dr. Larry Agenten, and did excellent excavations. And he concluded that this incredible bone bed 500 years ago was the result of human hunting and predation and butchering and so forth. 20 years later, Larry Todd and Dave Rapson directed excavations at Hudson and again, and they came up with a rather different interpretation, and that is that it's unclear whether all or many or even any of the bison were killed by human hunting and predation, that possibly it was natural mortality and so forth. And the important theme about this isn't so much who's right or who's wrong on this debate, but rather that different archaeologists can look at the same body of evidence and come up with different interpretations, and that's something important for the public to know. And likewise, the passage of 20 years or more, and new methods of investigation, new knowledge, in particular the science in the field of taphonomy, and applying that to bison bone beds has helped to explain the difference in those interpretations. But what I really liked about this chapter by Larry Todd and Dave Rapson in this book is I think they, as an archaeologist, I feel that they did a very effective job in designing an interpretive program that would make it compelling to the public. And in fact, I almost see it as an inquiry-based thing, such as Project Archaeology advocates. And they draw the important distinction between archaeological observations, looking at a bone bed and got lots of bones, and you find some spear points and so forth, but how do we interpret that? And that those are two very different phenomena, and it's important for the public to understand that observation and interpretation are different from one another. And I don't have time to go into it, particularly my entire talk about this, but they use various examples of observations on the bone bed, like the frequency of different parts of the bison skeletons, the presence of carnivore tooth marks on some bones, and the presence of evidence for trampling and so forth, and then use information, back up on, from experimental studies and actualistic research and so forth, and present the observations and then these bodies of knowledge to visitors, and then ask them, what sort of conclusions would you draw? And so I'm not advocating that that's the best way to go. I think in retrospect, certainly for how First Peoples buffalo jump the exhibits and so forth were developed there, that it would be very important, and it would have been very helpful to have archaeology educators like the Project Archaeology folks to participate in that message. And I want to move on now to the second theme that I'll explore in a little bit more depth, and that is, are interpretive centers sustainable in the long run? And this is kind of an important question, because if interpretive centers aren't sustainable or are not vibrant in the long run, then archaeology education, public education faces some dilemmas. So I'm going to use two quick case studies here. First is First Peoples buffalo jump that I participated in and directed excavations at, and then from which a interpretive center was built, and this shows annual visitation. So what I'm going to look at is simply annual visitation, long-term annual visitation numbers at First Peoples buffalo jump, and then at Head Smashed In buffalo jump in Alberta. And you can see why it really bounces up and down from 2003 through to 2016 annual visitation, and the long-term trend, as represented by that red line, is a decline in attendance. So we ought to be kind of concerned about that, because all of these interpretive centers at bison kill sites, they represent substantial outlays of money to build them, and enormous commitments of time by the people who are involved, and knowledge and expertise and so forth. And so we want to make sure that these are sustainable in the long run. And Jeanne has told me that it's not just bison kill site interpretive centers that have issues with attendance, but rather there are other archaeological interpretive centers around the country that also are facing declining attendance, and it's a very serious issue. Folks have had to be laid off, employees and so forth, because of declining attendance. My bottom line that I'm going to pass on to you is that I certainly don't have an answer to explain declining declining attendance at First People's Buffalo Jump or at other ones that are coming up in just a minute. I have come to appreciate that this is a very complex issue for which very little research has been carried out, as far as I can tell. The attendance, long-term attendance at museums, not only archaeological museums or interpretive centers, but museums of any kind. I could find almost no research about that. Here's one piece of research. This is from the Association of Science Technology Centers, and they have 150 or so members of this organization, 107 of which responded to the survey that they sent out in 2010 or 2011 or so, and then they published this short document online that presents long-term trends in visitation. And you can see in general the long-term trend is pretty good at these science centers and museums from 2002 to 2011. There was a drop in about 2008, and it increased, and then another drop from 2009 on. And again, I'm not going to try and present final answers about this. The main point I want to make is that I don't think that we have clear answers or a clear understanding yet of what explains these long-term trends. It is a complicated issue. They talk about things such as national and international economic trends, which could be an important factor. They also look at the different sides of institutions. They have 4 categories from very small to large, and the attendance varied between those. This graph shows the size category small had the biggest growth in attendance in this time span, but others, and the others have an upward trend, but not nearly, but they don't really understand why and how size affects that. The second case study, very briefly, is Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump in Alberta, Canada. If you haven't ever been to visit there, I strongly recommend it. I think it's an outstanding interpretive facility. That's the cliff in the middle of that photograph where the bison were driven over and killed. And the museum on the bottom left-hand side of the photo, the interpretive center was built right into the cliff. Just a great museum, I feel. And Jack Brink has an excellent chapter in this book that I showed earlier about Head Smashed In, not about the archaeology so much as building the interpretive center and all of the issues around that and sustaining it. They have done surveys, and the visitor reaction has largely been pretty positive. As you can see, there are some issues that visitors have and so forth. But I want to look at the visitation trends. It falls, Head Smashed In, based on its size, falls as a medium museum. That's that green line that the pointer, or the arrow, is pointing at. And that goes from 2002 to 2011, and Jack Brink in his chapter published a graph from 1987 to 2011. So just keep in mind what that green graph bar looks like in general, rising with a few ups and downs, but rising. And here's Head Smashed In attendance from 1987 to 2011. This has been a consistent downward decline in visitation, and that's something that is of strong concern to the folks that Head Smashed In. Jack Gwynn suggests some factors that might be responsible for this. It's very remote. The closest big city is Calgary, at 175 kilometers away. The closest town is Fort McLeod, which actually has gotten smaller, from 5,000 people down to about 2,000 or so now. But again, trying to figure out just what's the important factors and what aren't is difficult, and I think because there are site-specific problems with or site-specific issues. This is the one article that I could find about any museum anywhere in the world that actually presented long-term data on visitation trends, and it's a museum in Norway. And very briefly, that's from 1954 to 2006. Lots of ups and downs, big spikes and then dropping, and from 1995 or so onward, a general decline. Again, just speaking to the complexity of factors, the site-specific and museum-specific factors for that museum are that are important, they believe, is that the museum attendance, or excuse me, the size of the city and surrounding communities has been increasing in that 1954 to 2006. The museum has been open more hours per day and more days per week in the past. say that it really, you have to have long-range planning. You have to not only have this blockbuster exhibit, but you have to plan beyond that, and in order to try and avoid those big plunges. Again, no final answers here from me, but just to show the complexity, I believe, of trying to address this question of long-term trends in visitation. And finally, I'm about to end up here in a minute or so. There is this question that they ask at the very end of their article about the museum in Norway. Yeah, are high visitor numbers, should that even be our priority as a museum, or is that kind of old-fashioned, and should we have other priorities? And there has been a conversation about impact, and a museum can have a very strong impact, and not necessarily, that isn't tied to having increasing numbers of visitation. And I think, again, from Jack Brink talking about Head Smashed In, this is a great example of a museum having a strong impact in the communities that surround it, even though visitation has been declining. So that is my take on on-site interpretation at Bison kill sites and the complexities surrounding a couple issues, our message and long-term sustainability. Thank you.
Hello. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut this a little bit brief because I have to be back up to Hyatt to run a committee meeting soon. So I think that these were some really wonderful presentations, and I'm glad to see a lot of people in this room. Sometimes I feel like I'm Chicken Little. I feel like I'm kind of preaching to the choir right now, but I feel like the sky is falling all around, and maybe I felt this a little bit more profoundly in Iowa, where we've had anti-preservation legislation. We've had funding cuts that have impacted my job, and this is happening everywhere, and I know we're feeling it. So I see this research in archaeology education as one of the pillars of the sustainability of archaeology, and along with that, learning how to be our own advocates and learning how to effectively communicate better with the public and doing those more collaborative projects. So this is a good start. And I think the people who presented today, I consider them superheroes. Like we're diving in and reaching all audiences, but in particular reaching children. And we know from extensive research, or I know from extensive research, that sometimes it only takes one significant life experience to spark an interest in somebody. And so if we're doing archaeology education and we're reaching students and kids when they're young, hopefully those students will grow up to be stewards and interested in preservation. But we don't necessarily know that unless we're doing research and we're assessing our impact. And sometimes I feel like I'm told to do it all. So being an archaeologist is hard, and we like to focus on one thing. We become experts on one thing, and then we realize all of a sudden we have to become experts in a dozen other things. And that's really challenging. And I don't know if any of our presenters mentioned, because maybe it's obvious, but collecting evaluation data is like pulling teeth. It is really, really, really hard, and so I applaud them for taking the extra step beyond their job as archaeologists and beyond their jobs as archaeology educators to try to collect some new data. And it's also learning a new skill, and so we already feel pressure by our jobs. And then we've got to get better at it. We've got to learn these new skills. And when I say do it all, this is also a call to action for other archaeologists and other archaeology educators to assess anything and everything you can. Assess all the time. Collect information. And I always tell people archaeology is a lot like Sherlock Holmes, where searching for clues to tell a story about the past. And to do that, we rely on data. So collecting data in archaeology, that's our jam, right? That's what we do. We collect data. And this is collecting different kinds of data, and we haven't been necessarily trained on how to collect this kind of data about people and their thoughts and impact. It's completely different, but because we're so good at collecting data, let's just step outside of the box and learn how to do this too, because it's going to benefit all of us to be able to communicate what our missions are and determine that we're meeting our goals and we're making an impact. But this is really hard because we're already overworked and under pressure. And so timing is not just about fitting this in. Those of us who do archaeology education know that maybe education is written into a lot of different grants and projects and budgets, but if you're pressured for time and money, it's one of the first things to get dropped. And then in education and archaeology education, if you're pressured for time and money, your assessment and evaluation is one of the first things to get dropped. And I don't have any good answers to solve those problems, unfortunately. And then we heard in some of our presentations that the teachers, then they're pressured to try to fit everything in, and then they drop things like the final understanding and the civic engagement pieces. And no matter how well thought out our research designs are, our evaluation designs are, it really all comes down to implementation, and this is something I've been struggling with in Iowa, is to really have people on board to implement this. It doesn't matter how good your questions are, how good your surveys and questionnaires are in your interview process. If somebody doesn't collect data consistently, we know this from archaeological sites, if not everybody is collecting data the same way, your site interpretations are meaningless. And archaeology education research, also the social science research is the same. And going back to timing, that's where the implementation can fall apart when you're feeling pressured. And so I'm so happy that everyone here had these wonderful presentations and they did this research because they know it's important. And so you have to value the results and the impact of your research in order to follow through and do this. And again, so these are words that, I spent 15 years as a field archaeologist and never thought about these things. This is like diving into a whole new field and learning a whole new discipline, which is really challenging. And everyone who today did this really well. We have so much to learn, but we're getting there. And a lot of the sample sizes in these studies were really small, so you can't make giant leaps and generalizations about the impact of these studies. But we can start, and we can start to replicate these same studies and make them generalizable. And this is not only a problem in archaeology education, but a much bigger field like environmental education. And some people in more institutionalized education would say, if you have small sample sizes and you're just only looking at these case studies, is this really valid research? But I think it is, and I think it's a good start, and I think we're just getting better at it. So, yeah, I'm excited about the future of archaeology education research. We're creating a baseline, we're starting these studies, and the people who are doing this research are really dedicated to doing it well and learning how to do it better. I'm going to turn this over to Sarah, and I'm going to run back to the hive.
I also have to get to that meeting, but I'm really glad that Elizabeth's going ahead, and everybody wants to trek up the hill with me. I'd love to see you dashing. Thanks so much, Jeanne and Rebekah, for the invitation to be the discussant today. I'm really glad to be here and honored to get a sneak peek at the papers. It was really kind of fun to read them over the week ahead of time, feel the SAAs in my living room already. I'm like, wait, this is something I feel not in my house. But really marinate on them. And I wanted to share some of my visual clues that popped up in my mind that kind of pulled these papers a little bit together and talk about the evaluation of programs and the assessment of learning. And I used the PowerPoint as a bit of a graphic organizer to try and get all the ideas that were hopping around in my head to take form into something that can be done in a few minutes. Oh, goodbye, everybody.
Sarah, forgive me.
I think I'm going to the same meeting, so maybe I'll see you there. All right. First was the idea of scalar studies. Going from, I don't know if this is even a term, but it came up in my head of something I had seen years ago talking about spatial analysis of landscapes and archaeology, and I just kept having this image come back to me in each and every paper about going from the known to the unknown of some of the larger concepts that we're trying to get to, but also the large bison kill sites to the specifics of these interpretive centers and the specific interpretive centers, going from tackling the nature of science down to Riverside Elementary and really honing in with those students. The EPSCORA agency, Project Archaeology, and DOT, and that took me in and out of that scalar loop. Museum of the Rockies and the Roman Villa. So that had its own, on top of the papers also having this great diversity of what they were trying to tackle, they also had this element within. I think some of it also could be the elusiveness of what we're after. We're looking for that demonstration that students are achieving and understanding, or our visitors to informal education opportunities, and we're going back and forth and playing with scale a little bit. And I wanted to express what was in Gwynn's paper with Davis Bottom, and correct me, Gwynn, this is from the Tennessee Valley TVA doing alternative mitigation for Lake Cumberland.
The National District Corps of Engineers has
Corps
responsibility for the Lake Cumberland District.
So this is not anywhere near Davis Bottom, correct?
Right. That's
Nowhere
true.
near. This is huge for us in archaeology education because for alternative mitigation, and we have this idea that these studies have to take place in that very specific blue dot area, but what if the impact can be reached as far as the red? Are we willing to make those choices and be brave about it and move it into where we know we're going to have more impact? So that was a really nice detail from that paper. And I looked up scalar. I'm like, is that word what I want it to say? And it is a mathematical term meaning not linear, but having to do with magnitude. And I think that is what we're trying to do with our studies, and to amplify what we're learning from these smaller communities to have impact on the larger. I would like to have some ability to harness all these education trends and assessment trends. And just when I think I've read a paper and I've got an idea and I can go and implement, I read the next paper and it's starting and going from a very different place. And this wasn't just this session, that's just assessment in general. So I'm an end user of this data, and I desperately want a cookie cutter so I can go and replicate. But, and we're at the point of, we've known for a while we need to do assessments, and sessions have focused on, okay, we're trying to do assessments, to, okay, here, we're doing assessments, and then at SHA this year, we had a great panel on re-evaluating evaluation. And I saw that happening a lot in the papers too, either midway through or returning to their own study to replicate again. So I thought that was really nice. I don't know if you know this, but the fashion industry comes out with a color. They announce it in December. So when you get to your spring fashion shows and you see all that creativity, a lot of it's based on the color that's announced. I don't know if you know this, we're in the year of greenery. This is the spring fashion show. So I think there's an interesting time where we are given that theme as public archaeologists and those in archaeology education. Unfortunately, it seems to be right when abstracts are due. You're like, oh, I need something to tie it all together. But I think sessions like this really help grow that directive and that mission, so it's not coming at us just 6 months in advance. Jeanne, you said you're returning to this topic in 2 years? 1 year for a session? 2 years?
Every 2 years.
All right, so we're getting a little bit more distance and maybe learning, so we can see the variety of creative expression, but also get a little closer to a, I don't want to say common core of what we're working from, but from a more single point, which is going to take maybe some giving up of our freedom and creativity, which we're not good at doing. And you can see that in all archaeology education papers. There's a great freedom to choosing to what we do and how we do it. But to kick this further down the road, we're going to have to give up some of that freedom just to focus and pull it through. And you know, we need that because we're desperately trying to prioritize. Money and time is scarce. At FPAN, we do about 250 outreach events a year, just in my office alone. So we have to make tough choices. So this is the kind of information that we need to help direct the choices of what you do. And you messed me up with these museum, the festivals, because I've written them off my work plan, and now reading through this, I'm like, oh, well, now I kind of want to get back into them, and they take a lot of time. But thank you for that, because I'm going to steal that right away. So yes, I would like that cookie cutter. Okay, I started with this, oh, that's the next thing. I think some of the papers described who they work for, and some did not go much into that. But I would encourage people to speak to the assessment of your own organization as well. For example, I worked at the Kentucky Archaeological Survey, and it wasn't until I had to go to some mandatory 40-hour supervisor training that they said, did you know the mission of the university is education, research, and service? No, I did not know that, but it painted a different picture of some of the activities I was doing to know service was part of the mission of the university. For FPAN 2, education and outreach is one of our main work areas, but we also assist local governments and assist the Division of Historical Resources. And when those education and outreach themes, we struggle with those all the time and have maybe left the others a little lower on the totem pole of what we're trying to work up to. But I think we actually have better things we could say about what we do at FPAN, looking at how we assist local governments. We're going to have far clearer numbers and be able to demonstrate impact in a way that we have not yet been successful to show in the education and outreach realm. So think about that with your organizations as well. And it's good for people to know the variety of ways different archaeologists are employed. There's a great diversity of how we all work, and not many people know that. We are going through assessment at FPAN right now. It's not going to be helpful if the results come back and aren't tied to the FPAN mission. So we are constrained by that a little bit. So speaking of obstacles, we heard some of those today, and again with the reevaluating evaluation is kudos to the festival paper for the Junior Archaeology Day and just coming back at it again. And I would love to see, there's a lot of those Archaeology Day festivals, and that's something I think you could pull and replicate right away at those other ones that are happening. And Obscura for the longue durée, he went through of 8 years and trying to reevaluate during the process. I think some of the bigger issues I wanted to talk about, Jeanne with the nature of science, looking at how we're trying to get at student achievement as our kind of holy grail of what feels elusive and what we're after, and then come to find out, you know, it's a limitation the teachers have as well. And I read that and thought, well, is that our job? And I would tell you, I bet Jeanne Mo will nod her head and say, yes, that's her job. Is that my job? I don't know. I mean, it is, but with all the other competing things we have to get to, I just have come to accept that we've got to let those in the pre-service industry help train the teachers the best we can, and that's what most of us are working with. So can we have an impact? We can, but it's an obstacle. Secondly, with the Davis Bottoms paper, reading about the challenges in civic engagement with the students, because you know what I'm going to say, Gwynn, sitting there with Linda Levstik years ago in BW3s, reading her teaching history for the common good and saying, Linda, this statement makes me uncomfortable. The purpose of teaching social studies is to help students participate in a pluralistic democracy. And she said, well, that's very interesting, Sarah. Why does that make you uncomfortable? And I said, I don't know. It's just all the democracy, and it seems dogmatic, and it seems frightening. So I have taken her conversation that day forward many, many, many years, and have really had great faith that we were all over the pluralistic part. That's part of what we're doing as archaeologists. And that with project archaeology, that final assessment, the final performance of understanding, just to me, it's the culmination of not only presenting students with a problem, but showing them the roadmap to how you can be a part of it. So to hear that's the part that's getting left out, I'm not sure what that means for advocacy, for archaeology advocacy. We're in a huge uptick for archaeology advocacy nowadays, so to have that piece missing of how students get engaged with their local governments, and then because we are, us US folks in Canada, I have omitted a picture of who I would like to activate against, but I think that all of the social justice issues that we're seeing, we have a lot to contribute to that, and the students do as well. And I put the canon in there. That lesson, to me, if you don't do investigating shelter with the final performance of understanding, it's like the overture of 1812 without the canon. Sure, it's a beautiful piece. It's a nice composed thing, but you're missing the part that just takes you breath away. And every time I see that performed live, it just impresses you. It drives me to tears to hear the echoing, and that's what that lesson does for me. So we've got to make sure that there's fidelity with the teachers when they teach it, or you're taking away one of the main reasons I do archaeology, which has changed quite a bit. I do want to say a little non sequitur, but in Jeanne's paper, she had a line about with the students and learning that not all evidence matters or is created equally. And then thinking about your paper too, with all the changes in interpretation. I was listening to the Serial podcast during that, and I thought, people have an amazing ability and potential and willingness to give up hours and hours and hours of these mysteries that are based in evidence. They run with a different interpretation several times even within each episode, and you may not ever know the answer. And how great that could be if we could tell our field experiences with that much production value to really amp up the suspense, but why not? It's not exciting to hear the changes in interpretation that get made, and I think people have a high tolerance for it right now. And I wanted to say that the reason I have done archaeology for many years, when you ask Maureen Malloy why she did archaeology, she would say to end racism, period. So I have adopted that for several years. And now these issues with climate change and the President's Forum, and realizing, yes, I still do it for that reason in the long term, but in the short term, we've got a major emergent issue. And when I hear sessions like last night, how many people were there? Does anyone know? It was like 1,000? I know it was more than 500, but they said 10% of SAA was in the room last night. And a lot of the solution for the overwhelming impacts of climate change on cultural resources was education and outreach. And in my head, I thought, who's going to do this? Because people are doing many different things. So a lot of these very heavy topics fall on our shoulders. Climate change, genocide, tyranny, and you may think I'm exaggerating, but we had last year a contingent from Iraqi archaeologists and historians came to St. Augustine. We weren't told why, we just were told where to go and what to be prepared to talk about. And I thought, why are they here? It can't be, I'm flattered to think they were there for St. Augustine's 450th anniversary, but you got the guy with Hammurabi's code right behind him in the office. That couldn't be it. So it was very tense to start because we were given a lot of directives what we could and couldn't talk about. But at the end, it loosened up a bit, and we're like, why are you here? And a lot of things have gone on with ISIS, blowing up a lot of their sites that week. We're like, certainly you're very much needed back home, so it's great you're here. And he said, oh yeah, ISIS, that's a problem. What's a bigger problem to us is 40 years of genocide. We're here to learn about your civil rights, education, and what we've seen online. And that blew me away because we have millions of visitors to St. Augustine each year. I guarantee you very few of them are checking the box, I am here to learn about the civil rights movement. But I think in a very real way, they were trying to do this in their community as archaeologists to try and address what has happened over their time period. So we are very much being relied on, and our discipline needs us. I would say our country needs us, and after last night, our planet needs us. We need to stop messing around. We don't have a lot of time. There's a funnel of people coming at us who are going to want the most effective, impactful lessons that they can take forward. And that's going to take us really doing some replication of what we've heard today, what's been published previously, Journal of Education and Archaeology. We're pretty excited because we'll have a great outlet to get those studies out there. So, in benediction, go forth and work on your 2018 spring collections.